So welcome everyone to UFAW's Indo-Pacific Asia online workshop, Controversies and Collaboration, moving towards consensus in animal welfare. My name is Hugh Golledge and I'm Chief Executive and Scientific Director of UFAW. Before we start, I'd just like to say welcome to everyone, and in particular, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which many of you are joining us today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that welcome to any First Nations people joining us today. Welcome. This workshop came about because we at UFAW organised a lot of workshops and conferences during the pandemic, and we became increasingly aware that we were organising them all on
Yeah, that's full screen now, Hugh. Can't hear you though. Okay, Hugh, we still can't hear you.
Try again.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Sorry about that, everyone. My computer had a bit of a power cut in the middle of our conference, which is another exciting element of online meetings. So I'm not sure where you lost me, but I was just saying that we really wanted to organise this meeting to make sure that our meetings are accessible to those of you in parts of the world who don't find it easy to join us on European time. So I'm particularly delighted to welcome all our colleagues from the Indo-Pacific region. I'm just going to steal a little bit of your time to tell you a little bit more about UFAW before we start the conference proper, because some of you may not be that familiar with what we do. UFAW is the University's Federation for Animal Welfare, and we're an international scientific, educational, animal welfare charity and a membership organisation. And our mission is to discover what matters to animals, develop scientific solutions to animal welfare problems, and disseminate evidence-based animal welfare information. You can find out more about what we do at our website, ufaw.org.uk, but I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the things we do, including funding scientific research. And you can find out more about that at ufaw.org.uk/grants, where we have information on various grant schemes, from small student scholarships for summer projects all the way up to much larger funding for major research projects. We also publish animal welfare information, so you may well be familiar with our book series that we publish. Lots of those books hopefully are quite well known to lots of you, and our scientific journal Animal Welfare, which I'll mention a little bit about later. And we also have various activities to promote the development of what we call science in the service of animal welfare. In other words, trying to encourage animal welfare as a scientific discipline. And one of the most important of those, and one that I'd like to promote to you a little bit today, is our Links scheme, which is a network of people who represent UFAW at various universities around the world. And we have about 130 universities where someone who is involved in teaching animal welfare science promotes animal welfare science and the activities of UFAW to the people in their university. We're particularly keen to develop this scheme and to add more universities, and particularly to add more universities in parts of the world where we're not so well represented. So if you're joining us from an institution that doesn't have a link with UFAW, do have a look at that web link and consider perhaps signing up to be a link, and we can try and help you support animal welfare science in your university or institution. The other thing I wanted to mention very briefly before we move on to the meeting proper is our journal, Animal Welfare, which I hope many of you know. It's, as far as we know, the longest continuously published animal welfare journal. We've been publishing it for about 30 years. It's published lots of notable animal welfare research, including some very controversial research, but really important research. But we've become increasingly aware that the publication model we used to use, where we were a closed access journal that you had to pay to subscribe to, was not really sustainable, particularly in animal welfare, where the information that we all publish and the research that we do needs to be in the public domain so that people can actually put it into practice and improve animal welfare. So clearly having a barrier to access to that information is not really acceptable. And also, we were quite a slow journal to publish our papers, particularly because we printed our journal and you had to wait till the paper appeared in print. So I'm really pleased to say that as of next year, we'll be publishing the journal with Cambridge University Press as a gold open access journal, continuously published online, and it's giving us a much more rapid route to publishing papers. And this is really just to encourage you to consider submitting some of the research you're going to tell us about today, or any other animal welfare research that you might be interested in publishing to Animal Welfare, now that it's a much more accessible publication. And the other thing we've done to make it accessible is that we have very generous waivers for article processing charges. So although we do charge authors to publish in the journal, many universities around the world have agreements which mean you won't, as an individual author, pay an article processing charge. And we also have waivers for low to middle income countries who are part of the Research for Life scheme. And failing that, if you're a researcher who doesn't have recourse to funds, you can apply for a waiver just based on that lack of resource, and we will almost certainly be able to grant a waiver one way or another. So we really hope this is giving you a much more accessible route to publishing your animal welfare science. So please do consider having a look at our new webpage with Cambridge University Press and submitting your research to Animal Welfare. One last plug before we move on to the science. If you're enjoying this meeting, or you do enjoy this meeting, our next main UFAW meeting will be on the 20th and 21st of June next summer, online, and the abstract submission deadline for that meeting is in January. So please consider putting an abstract in for that one, or registering for that meeting if you'd like to come to the next UFAW meeting. We'd love to see you there as well. So that's just about me done. The one last thing to do is to remember that I'm the Chief Executive of a charity, and to tell you that UFAW and everything we do is funded solely by donations and legacies from members and supporters. So making meetings like this freely accessible and publishing the information we do and so on is made possible because people either become a member of UFAW or they donate money to support our work. So if you appreciate the work we do, please do consider joining or supporting us. We're always incredibly grateful for the people who support the work that we do. So with that, I'm going to hand over the meeting to the people who are actually in charge, which is Mia and Kat, who are the wonderful organisers of this meeting, who've put together this really exciting programme, and are going to be guiding you through the next 3 days of really exciting science and debate. And I'd like to say a really big thanks to them for organising this meeting and bringing UFAW to the Southern Hemisphere. And also to my colleague Steve Wickens, who like me is up very late at night doing all the technical coordination in the background and sorting everything out when the technology plays up like it just did. So none of this could happen without them. I've had much less to do with this than they have. So Huge thanks to them, and I'd just like to welcome Mia and Kat to start the meeting proper.
Thanks, Hugh. We are so grateful for your support in running this event so that the research from our part of the world can really find a stage and we can all connect with each other as well. I'm pleased to be joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations near Melbourne in Australia. If you're wanting to check out the full program and abstracts, the booklet, which contains all that information, is available on the UFAW website. We will be able to pop that in the chat as well.
Cool, and then we're going to have regular session breaks throughout, so make sure you check out those and use these times well to get something to eat, make a coffee, attend to any other necessities that you might have. So our goal here is to make this event easy and enjoyable to attend, particularly at this time of year. And when you have questions or anything you'd like to ask the speakers, we're obviously having our question sessions at the end of a block of speakers. So if you could just write your questions in the question box, you'll see, and we'll get to those when we get to the question time.
Yeah, if you're not sure where the question section is, look at your control panel. And as you go down through those grey bars with the different words of them, one says questions. You can expand it or even take it off the whole control panel and separate it out using the little pop-out button on the right-hand side of that grey bar. I'd just like to say that membership for UFAW is easy to do. I renewed my membership last week. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort. It's very affordable and helps support great events like this so that we can, I guess, keep finding a platform to share our science with each other and keep, I guess, advancing the field forward as well. I'd personally just like to thank Hugh and Stephen and also Louisa at UFAW for their incredible support. It's kind of funny that I started off whinging that their events were always at a bad time for us, and then they're like, okay, fine, organise an event. And then very grateful to Kat for joining me on this journey of coordinating it. We're still learning how to run this platform, so we hope that you'll be a kind audience over the next few days if we make any goofs. I've tried to backlog a catalogue of jokes to lay out if that happens. But yeah, we appreciate your patience and we're really glad to have you here and part of our event. We're incredibly grateful to all the wonderful speakers that are and our session chairs as well that have joined us to participate and be part of this event. So now, if you'd like to bear with us, we'll get the first talk up and I'll welcome Professor John Huxley, who's going to chair our first session. And John is joining us from Massey University in New Zealand.
Great, thank you very much, Mia. Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome from New Zealand to wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this, the first session of this UFAW funded conference, Controversies and Collaborations Moving Towards Consensus in Animal Welfare. It's my great pleasure to be chairing the first session this morning, which is composed of 3 pre-recorded presentations, and I'm delighted that all the speakers from those presentations will be joining us for a Q&A session towards the end of the session. So please, if you have questions, please get those questions ready to go and feed them into the question box as we go along, and we can answer them, or I'm sure the speakers will be happy to answer them at the end. So our first presentation is from Penny Timmer-Arends from the Ministry of Primary Industries in Aotearoa, New Zealand, titled Working Collaboratively to Improve the Welfare of Intensively Grazed Livestock During Winter in New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Penny Timmer-Arends and I'm a Senior Advisor in the Animal Welfare Sector Liaison Team at the Ministry for Primary Industries in New Zealand. My presentation today is Working Collaboratively to Improve the Welfare of Livestock During Winter. Working collaboratively with our sector stakeholders is sort of the bread and butter of the Sector Liaison Team, and we've done similar projects over the years on different areas of animal welfare as well. Another core role that our team does is getting out and talking to animal owners about looking after their animals. This is a photo taken of me a couple of weeks ago at a rural show. We were out talking to farmers and pet owners and transporters about what they need to do to take care of their animals. I just thought I'd pop a photo in so I'm not just a disembodied voice talking to a set of slides. I've been with the Ministry for Primary Industries for about 12 years now. And during that time, or for about 3 years, I actually worked as a dairy farmer as well. So we had a 500 cow farm at the bottom of New Zealand in the deep south. And we wintered our own livestock at the runoff, which is a couple of k's up the road from the milking platform. So I've got a bit of practical experience walking through the mud and shifting standards and feeding stock on the crops. So I've just got a couple of quick slides to provide a little bit of context before I get into the sort of main part of my presentation. So the Animal Welfare Act 1999 is the key piece of legislation in New Zealand to protect the welfare of animals. It places a duty of care on animal owners and persons in charge to provide for their animals' physical health and behavioural needs. And then that's further defined sort of based around the 5 freedoms, so the provision of sufficient food and water, adequate shelter, the opportunity to display normal behaviour, things like that. In 2015, the Act was updated to recognise sentience and also allow for the creations of regulations. And so these are requirements to address low to medium level offending with infringement fines or regulatory offences attached to them. The Animal Welfare Act also has codes of welfare that sit underneath it, where more specific information is provided to sort of flesh out those physical health and behavioural needs. And they cover species as well as situations. So we've got codes of welfare for our key pastoral species, which are deer, dairy cattle, sheep and beef cattle. And then there are also the situational codes around things like transport and temporary housing for companion animals. Just a very quick overview of winter grazing. It's animals kept on crop or pasture at a relatively high stocking density. There might also be some supplement, and the animals are shifted fairly frequently. You can see in the photo here, there's some dairy cows on some fodder beet. It's more common in the southern parts of New Zealand where the very cool temperatures mean there's no pasture growth over winter. And if it's not done well, it can impact both animals and the environment. Some of the risks of winter grazing around poor transitioning and the nutritional issues that can be associated with going from pasture to crop too quickly, so acidosis, for example, an increased risk of mastitis and lameness, cold stress, reduced lying times if the surface quality is poor, and giving birth in mud. In winter 2019, footage of poor winter grazing practice was supplied to the mainstream media, and this was followed by a period of intense media interest in the practice. The Minister of Agriculture responded by forming the Winter Grazing Task Force, whose terms of reference was to look into the problems, understand some of the challenges, and provide recommendations as to how we could improve winter grazing. So the Winter Grazing Task Force, which was established in August 2019, operated for about 3 months and went through a series of sort of meetings, inviting speakers along from the sector to understand the issues. And at the end of that, published a report which contained 11 recommendations, sort of a mix of short and long-term things that needed to happen. And I guess just the take-home message from their report is that poor animal welfare is not a farmer problem, and it takes a whole of supply chain response to make the sort of improvements that were recommended, which fits quite well with the collaborative theme of this conference. So following the publication of the task force report, The Winter Grazing Action Group was established in February 2020 to implement the 11 recommendations that had been set. The action group is comprised of both sector groups, so the levy bodies in New Zealand, Dairy NZ, Beef and Lamb, and Deer Industry New Zealand, and then some of the membership groups as well, so the Veterinary Association, Federated Farmers, DCANs, which represent milk processors, the Ruminant Nutritionists Association, and PGG Wrightson, which provided us some sort of agronomy and specialist crop input into the group. A key output of the action group was a guidance document called Expected Outcomes for Animal Welfare. And this described good practice for animal welfare on winter grazing systems. I think prior to this, there wasn't really a clear understanding of what farmers should be aiming for, what good looks like. And so working with all the sector groups listed below, we were able to sort of agree a set of good management practices across all those different species groups, which provided a really good basis for communicating to farmers and making sure our messaging was consistent. So the expected outcomes document contains 7 key outcomes for farmers to achieve in winter grazing systems, set out in the sort of no, do, check format you can see on the slide. And very quickly, it's making sure animals give birth in the right environment, having contingency planning for poor weather, animals able to easily access drinking water, ensuring winter feeding is planned out so that animals get the right amount of food, but also any nutritional problems are avoided, managing the surface quality of the paddock so that animals can lie down comfortably, and working together, farmers, their farm staff and graziers, to make sure roles and responsibilities are clear, and they make sure good animal welfare outcomes are achieved. And then also number 7, making sure at the end of winter farmers look back, consider what went well and think about what they might want to tweak next season. So using the action group work as a bit of a starting point, the industry groups led a lot of work and developed resources for farmers to help them improve their winter grazing practices. As well as animal welfare, they also include a lot of environmental good practice because farmers need to meet both outcomes. So just a couple of quick examples. Beef and Lamb, Deer NZ, and Federated Farmers produced a series of webinars. There was some in-person work as well, but all this kind of happened during COVID times, so in-person stuff was a little limited. Dairy NZ, Ag Research and the Southern Dairy Hub did some work looking at cow lying behaviour, environmental conditions, and what the paddock conditions were like underfoot, or under hoof, I guess, to provide advice for farmers on when they should take action, like shifting their cows, etc., to ensure good welfare outcomes. The New Zealand Association of Resource Management, which has more of an environmental lens because they're sort of operating to the Resource Management Act, compiled a whole heap of resources for farmers in one place, including animal welfare requirements, but also regional council and national environmental requirements as well. And the Deer Industry New Zealand hosted a series of farm visits with Ministry for Primary Industries and regional councils to help upskill us on what deer winter grazing looks like. MPI also took the lead on several key areas of work, but again, in keeping with the theme, they were all sort of implemented in a collaborative manner. So we contracted Ag Research to deliver 5 winter grazing seminars in the South Island, targeting rural professionals, so farm consultants, rural bankers, veterinarians, agronomists, and sort of technical specialists who advise farmers around cropping. And these seminars brought together the latest animal welfare and environmental science, using our sort of key speakers from Ag Research. We also had other speakers from across the sector, from Dairy NZ, the Ruminant Nutrition Association, and Beef and Lamb, and also invited the sort of relevant regional council for the particular seminar as well. So it was, again, a collaborative effort and coming at things from both the welfare and environmental lens. The Ministry for Primary Industries, working with Ministry for the Environment, developed this intensive winter grazing module for farmers. So it's sort of written winter grazing plan to help them identify their key risks and management practices to ensure they're going to get good outcomes. So the development was government-led, but we were consulted with industry for feedback, and again brings together sort of the environmental and animal welfare considerations. And in fact, the animal welfare guidance is just lifted directly from the action group work, so really consistent messaging in that space as well. MPI is responsible for enforcing the Animal Welfare Act, so obviously took the lead on compliance as well. Winter 2020, we took a largely educative approach, so when we spoke to farmers in response to complaints, giving them codes of welfare and guidance and advice on what they need to do. Winter 2021 and 2022, we took a slightly different approach. So we put additional staff into the Southland and Otago regions where crop-based wintering is more common. And during autumn, we did proactive visits to farmers who we'd seen last year or thought maybe were at higher risk, just based on their crop paddocks. And then during winter, responded to complaints. And we're able to respond in a really timely manner with those additional staff members. And just before the proactive visits started, our compliance staff down south worked with regional councils and stakeholders to let them know what our approach during winter was going to be and what they could expect. To support our compliance staff in responding to complaints, we developed an assessment tool with expert advice from a welfare scientist, so using sort of animal-based metrics. We then put a practical lens over it to make sure that our compliance staff are able to work through the tool in a sort of reasonable time frame. They're not there doing 24-hour behavioural observations like a scientist might. They could be on farm for just 1 or 2 hours. Winter 2020, the assessment tool only included cattle because that's where a lot of the welfare science sits, but we updated it in 2021 to include some questions around deer and sheep. So, for example, recording the fleece length of sheep. COVID sort of hampered the rollout of the assessment tool. In 2020, we did some sort of online training. And in 2021, it was really good actually to be able to do some in-person training with our welfare scientists and compliance staff down in the South Island, and getting out on farm and sort of putting the assessment tool into practice to make sure everyone was aware of how to use it and what we were looking for. So there's definitely signs that things are improving as a result of this collaborative effort and focus on winter grazing. So we've got a full report available on our website, but just a sort of a snapshot of the complaints statistics from winter 2021. There were 187 jobs nationally, 39 of which were proactive, so those autumn visits I spoke about earlier. 94% of farmers were found to be compliant. Maybe sort of a dozen or so got given some advice or education or things they could improve. One farmer did receive a warning letter, and there was one quite serious case that's still being worked through, potentially for prosecution. Anecdotally, talking to the sort of regional councils and sector bodies, there's been a good uptake in written winter grazing plans, and an increase in good management practices being implemented. We haven't kind of finished writing up the winter grazing complaints from winter just been 2022, but there has been a decrease in the number of complaints. Is sort of one of the early things I can say. So while we've seen some good signs of improvement, there is still more work to be done. So the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, or NAWAC, are reviewing the codes of welfare for deer, dairy cattle and sheep and beef cattle, taking that winter grazing guidance document and looking where minimum standards or recommended best practices can be included for better winter grazing outcomes. Research into different ways of wintering is also taking place, so trying to find new solutions for different sort of land types. Some of that's off paddock, but also different grazing systems as well. There's still quite a big gap in the literature for winter grazing for sheep and deer, so we don't have a great understanding of lying requirements for these species. MPI is currently funding some work into looking at the lying requirements of sheep. And while the action group has now ceased operating, having delivered 10 of the 11 task force recommendations, the Prime to Process Animal Welfare Forum, which was established in 2008, and consists of our sector stakeholders as well as MPI, is still working to improve animal welfare across the supply chain. So that's the end of my presentation. You can access all the documents I've referenced at that web link, mpi.govt.nz/wintering, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much. This is the one massive advantage of recorded presentations. It doesn't put the pressure on the chair to make sure people stick to time. So that was our first presentation from Penny. Thank you very much, Penny. We'll move straight on to our second presentation, which is The Wickedness of Mud and No Trees by Helen Beattie from Veterinarians for Animal Welfare Aotearoa.
Kia ora, and welcome to The Wickedness of Mud and No Trees. I'm Dr. Helen Beattie, the Managing Director of Veterinarians for Animal Welfare Aotearoa. In the following presentation, pictures and images are hyperlinked to their source. Given this as a pre-record, I'm presupposing what Penny's presentation contained, though I suspect she will have outlined the high levels of stress and anxiety that existed year on year around the practice of intensive winter grazing, that is, stock on crops behind a live wire, that resulted in the ministerial task force being established in 2019 to address these concerns. The concerns around the welfare of animals, people and the environment. She may have noted that the task force report and the work of the action group set a new foundation for winter grazing practices that has materially changed the way we view and do winter grazing. I agree that this was useful and a largely successful process, while noting there were many detractors and dissatisfied parties and intensely high levels of anxiety about the task force. I wanted to make sure that it is understood that I support this work and how it was done. Perhaps worthy here to note my conflict of interest, I was reasonably involved. At the same time, there's still room for improvement, and my talk is about why it's so difficult to A, get traction on these types of conversations, and B, how difficult it is to shift the needle on those outcomes. That said, let's go. So in the work that VAWA does, we're very mindful of wickedness. It's front and centre on our website. It's a very strong driver and controller of some of the biggest challenges that we face in our use and engagement with animals. I want to be clear that where wickedness exists, it's often the system that has delivered it. The system is the whole supply chain, from banks to territorial authorities giving consents to veterinarians and rural professionals through their advice to farmers, and MPI through policy and lack of compliance action, and society for not speaking up. We're all in this together. We'll come back to this, but be clear that I'm not pointing the finger at farmers. We are all responsible. And I also want to say it's not all wicked. I want to acknowledge that many farmers and those engaging and caring with animals are doing a great job. And it's also fair to say that the vast majority care very much about the animals that support them, their families, and, this is important, the whole sector. I'll go into the influencing factors about why New Zealand has ended up in this wickedness in some aspects of what we do. But I note that it's not limited to the agricultural sector either. There are other ways we engage with animals that also meet the wicked definition. So wicked problems are problems with many interdependent factors, making them seem impossible to solve. Solving wicked problems requires a deep understanding of the stakeholders involved and an innovative approach. The term wicked problem was first coined by Horst Rittel, a design theorist and professor of design methodology at the Ulm School of Design in Germany. He described 10 characteristics, and some that stuck out to me were: there is no definitive formula for a wicked problem. Every wicked problem is essentially unique. Every wicked problem can be considered a symptom of another problem. And there is always more than one explanation for a wicked problem, because the explanations vary greatly depending on the individual perspective. So Google will provide lots of images and information about wicked problems, and lots are really good. And they'll give you an overview of the various parts of a wicked problem. However, the best summary that I have seen of wicked problems is this, which I think is completely self-explanatory. There's just so many crossover or independent parts in a wicked problem. And in thinking about mud and no trees, tackling this from just an animal welfare perspective is easy peasy. Don't do mud and do trees. But of course, those animals exist in systems, and those systems include people with mortgages and responsibilities, including production targets, and this is why it's wicked. So a couple of examples of what I'm thinking about when I say cattle on mud. And it's not hard to see why this is a genuine one health, one welfare concern or wicked problem. These outcomes are not good for the animals, the environment, or the people. They're all interconnected. The first two are probably pretty obvious. For the people, it affects their health and welfare through being unhappy by what they see, the anxiety and worry about every winter having a bad grazing outcome. They really genuinely care about that, and the risk of being exposed by activists. In a bigger picture, our consumers care, meaning our market access is affected, meaning our milk and meat processors care. And if this goes badly, then all of New Zealand will care, as this practice underpins a significant proportion of our GDP and economic well-being. This means a lot of people are affected, including you and me, if you're a New Zealander. So for winter grazing, when done on heavy soils, runoff dumps sediment, pathogens and nutrients into our waterways. The sediment eventually drops out and fills the interstitium in between the stones and the riverbed and kills the macroinvertebrates. Nutrients allow for algal blooms, and in the case of nitrate nitrogen in our water, is correlated to preterm births, low birth weights, and an increase in risk in colorectal cancer. And pathogens can make us sick. And here we are on gravelly soils with no mud, noting also there's no shade. But despite there being no mud, on gravelly soils we still have issues where nitrogen can run through these soils and into our water aquifers. These soils are often also in the hottest and driest parts of Aotearoa, and so we put on pivots to shift water and to grow grass. Pivots and trees are not like peas and carrots. They don't go well together. So that means animal welfare and pivots are not a match made in heaven either. The Winter Grazing Task Force stated, firstly, it is clear to us that animal welfare is not sufficiently prioritised by anyone along the supply chain, and we see this as a key barrier to adopting good or improved practice. In line with this, on these gravelly soils and dry areas, the trees are removed to grow grass and the animal welfare is deprioritised. We know cattle start feeling heat stress at around about 23 degrees with some humidity. In these environments, that can be 85 plus out of 90 days over the summer, with temperatures regularly reaching high 20s and low 30s, and there will be very many uncomfortable cattle in these situations. And here's an image to allow you to think about the scale of shadeless cattle in different settings. There's no hard data on either the hectares of cropped land used for winter grazing or an accurate number of farms with insufficient shade or shelter. However, driving around Canterbury in the Mackenzie country, central Otago, Maniatortua, Marama and the Dunstan Valley gives you a fair indication that the number is reasonably high. Arguably, this practice is in breach of our Animal Welfare Act through Section 4B of the Physical Health and Behavioural Needs that state animals need, quote, adequate shelter. And sometimes we have mud and no trees colliding. So that set the scene. So why don't we just fix it? It can't be that hard, right? Remember this. So how did we get here? So there's some big ticket items that we need to think about and drivers that got us here and why we can't easily shift the needle. So the change from the sheep and beef to dairy industry through the 1990s and 2020s certainly contributed. The drive for perpetual economic growth, including the doubling of exports initiative from the national government, contributed. And number 3 is our reality. It's wicked because changing it will have massive implications. Undoing this system too quickly will result in suffering for many, many New Zealanders, not just the farmers involved in these systems. So let's be clear, this is us, our society, and these practices underpin our economy. So one might ask, how do we let this happen? I'll refer you back to the deprioritisation of animal welfare as the simplest answer, and production and greed as strong secondary drivers. Let's break this down a little bit and think about some of the actors. We start off with a mortgage from the bank that's tied to the budget, that's tied to advice from experts, such as those in farming sector organisations, rural professionals, veterinarians, etc. The farming family's prosperity is dependent on the system paying the bank's mortgage and to feed the family. That's perfectly legitimate. The community's prosperity relies on the family's prosperity because it supports fertiliser reps, veterinarians, rural professionals, seed merchants, shops, those selling cars and servicing tractors. And to be clear, farmers are part of a long supply chain of enabling parties, from individual people to politicians, government and sector policy, professional advice and the public, and no part of the supply chain that could have influenced change spoke up or stopped the direction of travel. So how big is this wickedness? And the short story is we don't really know. That being said, those details aren't really that important because, as I noted before, this is a small practice that supports the wider industry and in fact underpins a significant part of Aotearoa New Zealand's economy, hence its wickedness. And let's just be clear, if it wasn't wicked, we ought to have fixed it by now. On the last point, point 4, I note that cropping isn't just winter and nor is it Southland. Gravelly soils, as I noted before, have issues too. And any soil that is left bare risks runoff and loss of our prized topsoil to the ocean. The point is to make sure we don't just point the finger at the mud issue. It's bigger than that. And even though the images of cattle, sheep and deer in mud are very powerful, other situations have equally as much impact on our environment. My apologies for the poor image. What this does show us is a rough indication of the scale of winter grazing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We can see that the amount of seed sold would have planted out about 1 million hectares. The yellow highlighted area shows the seed used for cropping that would have accounted for about 580,000 hectares. And the red circles on the right are fodder beet, and it's a noticeably smaller number compared to the 1 million hectares, so only about 64,000 hectares. And it's important because this is some of the most difficult farming scenario and poor outcomes that we see are related to the use of fodder beet. And per the conversations we've just had, the importance of winter grazing and cropping to New Zealand animal ag cannot be understated. So while it's a tiny amount in hectares overall, the size of the impact to the industry it supports is huge. So back to those actors. Here's a few. This isn't a comprehensive list, but the point is there are lots of players that need to collaborate or show leadership to make the change that is necessary. And if we were to summarise, it's the whole supply and user chain that ultimately needs to be involved in creating the change. So regulation is touted by some as being the answer. I'm very clear that it's not, or at least not alone. Consider no shade on a Canterbury farm. A complaint is made, data shows it's 28 degrees. We can expect if cows are experiencing heat stress. There's a centre pivot on the farm system, and therefore the family rely on the water from that pivot, which also means there's no shade, but it also makes the grass grow to make milk to pay the mortgage. What do we do with that complaint? Pot the farmer. They're a long way through the supply chain that's been supported by banks, regulators, industry, etc., etc. Also think that if enforcement action is taken, what are the ramifications for the very many farms in Aotearoa in the same situation? I'm not saying we shouldn't be taking action and that we shouldn't be resolving this. We absolutely should. But I am saying that enforcement or sudden regulation right now isn't fair nor a just way to do business. And we, farmers, absolutely ought to expect action and leadership from sector leaders because this is not going to go away. It ought not to be up to activists and individuals to drive change. We need clear, small steps in a pathway tied to a strategy and a vision. The lack of leadership on these issues is not good for farmers. They're left feeling stressed and defensive and annoyed that yet more pressure and change arrives upon them rather than understanding it's part of the pathway towards the vision. So hopefully we've made it clear that mud and shade are truly wicked. They're interconnected, they're big, and these things stop conversation, progress and change. They're also urgent. We've got an energy scarcity crisis heading our way, climate change is upon us, and consumer needs are ever changing. Having identified some challenges, I'd like to offer some solutions or thoughts about solutions. And this largely relates back to the conversation about co-design. We need to figure out our vision. Where are we going and why? Identify the top challenges and make a plan to address them. What are we doing about shade, shelter, cow-calf contact, bobby calves, virtual fencing? What do we think about that? What do the cows think about that? What do our consumers think about that? We also need to talk about profit versus production. We need to be clear about how we want to do business. Less animals and intensification doesn't have to mean less profit. Fair and just change absolutely must be how we do business. Human behaviour change will be part of these processes, And we know that what is enabling there are small steps and nudges in the right direction and careful language to make sure we engage and not disengage people, and make sure we provide adequate support for farmers to take those steps. Briefly on regulation, it may be needed to catch some recidivists, but let's be clear, regulation itself is a stay out of jail option only. We ought to be striving for thriving, not just surviving. Wherever regulation is put in, it needs to follow after education, after leadership, and after clear communication and expectations are set. So in summary, mud and no trees are truly wicked. They are whole of supply chain challenges. Regulation and legislation are not the answer, and they're merely a stay out of jail card. Jumping to enforcement isn't fair, and we need to ask the question about whether there's a better way to do business. Think about co-designing our vision and our solutions to our current wicked problems. We can do this, and we can do it better. I'm very much looking forward to a further discussion on the panel. Ka kite.
Great, thank you. That's Helen's presentation. We'll hear more from Helen in the panel discussion. So that brings us to our final presentation in this section, which is from Jodi Salinsky, the University of Auckland, and Tara Jackson from the New Zealand Anti-Vivisection Society, and it's titled, Does It Need to Be Us and Them? Animal-Based Research and Animal Activist Communities Can Work Together for a Better Future.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Tara Jackson and I'm the Executive Director of the New Zealand Anti-Vivisection Society, a New Zealand-based charity that works to end animal experimentation and the harmful use of animals in science in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a vegan animal rights activist and I've been working for NZAVS since 2015.
Kia ora, I'm Jodi Salinsky and I'm the Animal Welfare Officer and University Veterinarian at the University of Auckland, attending vet in US terms. I oversee the Animal Care and Use Animal Research Program, including strategic initiatives, policies, and operations around animal health, welfare, and research. Before we go any further, we'd love it if you would complete a couple of poll questions for us. It's nothing too stressful, and it will only take a few seconds. Just follow the link in the slide. We tried this earlier, so hopefully it will still work, and shouldn't be too tough. Just scan the QR code or type in fullstart.nz. We really appreciate you doing this for us. Yes, don't worry, we budgeted this time into our lovely 15-minute talk. Everybody seems to be working, hopefully. Just 2 questions, I promise. Again, it won't be too stressful. By the way, we've done this for other groups and it's been really beneficial. So thank you for taking. Okay, good. Everyone seemed to have gotten what they need to get. Yay. Pass it on to Tara.
Based on historic interactions between the scientific community and animal rights activists, we aren't the most likely of friends. But what we've learned from open communication and trust is that some of our goals align and that we have a lot more in common than either of us anticipated. By focusing on the areas where we agree, while also openly acknowledging areas where we disagree, we've been able to work together to create a better future for animals. We'll briefly talk about 5 key benefits that have come from this collaborative approach to help highlight what's possible when working together.
Okay, so better, more accurate communication to the public. Tara and I met in 2018 when she came to speak at an Anscart New Zealand board meeting. And despite my initial reservations, we got along quite well. We had polite follow-up emails around Official Information Act requests, but not more than that. In 2019, NZAVS put out a communication about rabbits having substances rubbed in their eyes at the University of Auckland, and this was based on a published paper on the work that was done. Some of the information wasn't accurate, and there was a pending Official Information Act request from NZAVS that the university hadn't had time to respond to, which was frustrating. I really didn't want to go back and forth with emails since it would take time, and as we all know, there's always the possibility of misinterpretation and clarification needed, which is annoying and then takes even more time. I thought that it couldn't hurt to try and speak with her since we'd gotten along reasonably well when we met. The comms and legal team allowed me to do it, so I did, and that was the start of our relationship. Although many people in her position might have told me where to go, Tara was incredibly gracious and did what she could to rectify the situation in a further written communication and on Facebook. We spoke about the situation honestly and both acknowledged the side of each other. I could see how NZAVS had filled in the blanks around information that wasn't stated in the peer-reviewed paper where they had found the study. A good reason to use the Prepare and Arrive guidelines to help with research reproducibility and accuracy of information and to do more work with openness. And she could see how it would have been best to wait for the additional information from the OIA request, and that not doing so would have been frustrating for us. I think a lot of us working in animal-based research feel like animal rights organizations only want to put out sensationalist and misleading information, and maybe some do, but there are others that want to do better.
And from my perspective, this phone call could have been really awkward and heated, but it wasn't at all. It was refreshing to simply be called on the phone and asked directly why we are doing what we're doing. We genuinely do want to be putting out as accurate information as possible, so feedback like this is happily accepted and I think strengthens our work. A better understanding of what each other wants and an insight into new perspectives. One of our flagship campaigns right now at NZAVS is the Striking at the Source campaign, which aims to create fundamental changes that will help shift the course of science over time. The most important part is that we are envisioning an upgrade to the 3 Rs. We want to see it reflected in policy that New Zealand is committed to phasing out the harmful use of animals in science as technology permits. From this campaign, the key benefits we've had from working together are we were actually able to get Jodi's feedback about this campaign prior to reaching out to other stakeholders about it, which meant we were better able to adjust our proposals in ways that would make them more appealing to the scientific community. This is a challenge animal advocacy groups seem to face as we communicate in such different ways and can often unknowingly write in ways that put industry members off engaging with us. From consulting with key stakeholders, we refined our action plan down to 21 points from 27, and we adjusted some of them to make them more realistic. Even getting feedback from key stakeholders is a huge win. Institutes who would have closed their doors on us in the past are now spending their time and energy on reading our material and providing valuable feedback. The most powerful part about reaching out to key stakeholders and trying to work with the industry as much as possible is that we'll be able to show the New Zealand government where there is agreement from both sides. If there are changes that we all want, we just need a little bit of leadership from the government, then that seems like a sensible place to start.
When I first looked at the campaign, I thought that there were some great ideas, some that needed a bit more fleshing out or tweaking, and of course, some that were never going to be things I, or people doing animal-based research or teaching, would agree with. And that's okay. We aren't coming from the exact same perspective in all areas, but we definitely are in some areas. NZAVS did a great job asking for feedback and incorporating aspects into the campaign proposals. Knowing where Tara was coming from enabled me to help clarify points for some individuals and groups when feedback was being developed. We learned quite a bit from each other through our conversations. There are often times that we think about things differently after speaking about them and considering the other person's viewpoint. We always keep our conversations respectful and helpful. So moving on to some fun part here. What we've achieved, animals rehomed. Everyone likes that. So we have rehomed, actually that should be 197 animals with our partnership between the University of Auckland, UFAW, and NZAVS in the last 12 months. This has been a combination of rats, pigeons, zebra finches, and rabbits. We've actively adopted out animals for many years at the university, but I'm especially proud of the partnership we have with UFAW and NZAVS. The animal facility staff, vets, researchers, students, and others that know about the work are all excited. As you might imagine, although this is feel-good work, it was still a struggle for some senior leadership to get past the fear factor. Even some of the technicians cringed at the thought of Tara, having access to their phone numbers, but they've seen the good work we've done together, and they know that NZAVS is an organization that doesn't condone violence against people, and that really helps. It took a lot of organizing and many hoops to jump through at the university and between the three organizations, but it's been worth it. This large-scale rehoming has been a huge learning curve for all of us, and we haven't perfected things yet. But due to the ongoing communication and trust we've built, we are improving what we do all the time. Tara is especially great at keeping the very busy hoo-ha folks in order and sending out great messaging on social media and other platforms encouraging adoption. As we know, it's not possible to only breed what animals are needed in research, and it's hard to euthanize animals. So having the ability to rehome some of the surplus animals is very rewarding and increases morale. Techs love when they ask if their animals can be adopted, and the answer is yes.
Trust being built beyond the University of Auckland. The relationship NZAVS has with the University of Auckland isn't an exclusive one. We're open to working with anyone if it means that we can have a positive impact for animals. Over the past several years, NZAVS has attended meetings with ANZCART, MPI, Universities New Zealand, NIAC and other key stakeholders. We've had tours around facilities, which included meeting animals used for research. We've spoken at ANZCART, ANZLA and ALAS conferences, and this one. And more recently, I attended an Animal Ethics Committee meeting in person where I got to be a fly on the wall and provide feedback at the end. A pretty profound first for NZAVS. These types of opportunities are incredibly beneficial. Not only do we get to share our perspectives and work with industry members, but we also get to learn more. We're trying to change an industry that we only really get to see the tip of the iceberg of. So the more we can learn, the more we know where to position ourselves to make the best impact for animals. None of this would have been possible without openness and the existence and development of relationships. And a key catalyst to the extent of the good relationships we now have is Jodi. Since she first reached out, more and more industry members have opened up to working with us, and I'm aware that this isn't a coincidence. Together, I think we're showing those who are skeptical that nothing bad is going to happen, and that in fact it's quite the opposite. There were others who also reached out and worked with us prior to Jodi, which would have also helped, but Jodi has been a key driver of our ability to work with rather than against as much as possible.
Although I trust Tara and certainly have opened some doors and encouraged others to give her a chance, which many have, I've given her some pointers and feedback about communications with those organizations. But I really think it's a testament to Tara's proactive mindset, great personality, and the culture that she has built at NZAVS that is a huge reason we are moving forward and increasing efforts around working together in New Zealand. The most exciting thing for me, outside of helping my own institution move forward, was helping another university move forward in this space that previously had a contentious relationship with NZAVS, as well as facilitating the relationship between Tara and Universities New Zealand. There are many benefits to this relationship for all the universities, whether some of them know it or not. Many other organizations have come to me for assistance with openness and working with organizations like Tara's, and it's a great feeling. Additionally, this is the first year that ANZLA did not have security at the annual conference, and ANZCART didn't have security in both 2021 and 2022. Planning for the future, how we can work together to make a positive impact for animals. We all love and care for the animals, and most of us, if not all of us working in animal-based research, would prefer not to have to use them at all. Of course, we already work in the 3R space, but we need to constantly push ourselves to evolve past that and come up with new ways of working to further embrace the 3Rs, especially replacement. Getting out of our comfort zone and engaging with animal activist organizations that are open to working together is a way to make a different and meaningful effort to move forward and look at information that may help precipitate significant changes. As we've said previously, there are many points on which we both agree, but the conversations need to start and continue, and then work needs to be done together to make the biggest difference for animals, people, and research. So now we would like you to do our second poll. Hopefully this works well again, and it only takes a few seconds. You might notice it's the same two questions as the first one, and that's correct. So hopefully you're getting this now. Hopefully it's working again, which would be lovely. And yes, they're supposed to be the same two questions. Give you a few more seconds. Fingers crossed it's working like it should. Almost done. Great. Okay, well, thank you for listening. Our contact information is up on the screen if you want to get in touch with us. And yeah, thanks so much.
Great, thank you very much to all our speakers. So if I could ask our speakers now to come online and join me, we will start the half hour of question and answers that we have time for. There's Penny. Hi, Penny. So whilst the speakers are just joining me, can I ask all of our guests, if you've got any questions, please now, and you've got any reflections from this morning's session, please, now is your opportunity to be getting those questions into the question box so that I can address them at our panelists. Panelists, I guess I'll start, and thank you first of all again. Thanks again for your excellent presentations. And my question to you all, and I guess I'll go around you one at a time in the order in which you presented, is what's the one positive lesson you have learned from collaborating to solve an animal welfare problem? Penny, can I come to you first?
It seems unfair based on order. I don't have a deep answer, just that, yeah, joint resources are going to get you to the end goal faster than trying to go it alone. So yeah, nothing deep or insightful, just it works.
Thank you, Penny. Helen.
I think that the collective approach, certainly around the winter grazing stuff, meant that anxiety across the supply chain, notwithstanding there was a lot of anxiety about it in the first place, but I think it enabled there to be a broader understanding across an increased number of parties, and therefore reduced some of that anxiety. And I think a lot of these big processes and challenges, the change in itself causes anxiety, irrespective of, you know, what it is that we're looking at. So whether it's, you know, changing your car or changing your farm system, like we feel anxious about that. So trying to reduce that and improving human well-being during that process and enabling people to come with us, to me, was a really key outcome.
Great, thank you. Tara.
I would say the best impact I think we've had has been actually being able to access more information. I would say, I think there's a lot of gaps we have to fill in, like Jodi sort of mentioned at the very beginning of our talk, but we are a charity, obviously, we're not a business, we only exist for as long as we need to, so we don't want to be, you know, fighting ghosts, essentially. We want to be making sure that we're being able to be strategic and target the things that are going on that we are against. So actually having access to that information so we can get that full picture has been incredible. I think a lot of people working in this sort of space, in the anti-vivisection sort of movement, we don't get a very clear picture of what's going on. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. So actually talking to members of the scientific community and finding out exactly what the problems are, especially from their perspective as well, is incredibly beneficial, because what we're finding is a lot of the problems we're highlighting, members of the scientific community are seeing as a problem as well. So yeah, I think it's almost like there's these two worlds happening, and if you don't talk, there's no room to work together, and you also get these sort of misconceptions about what each other are like. And I think, you know, a lot of those misconceptions have been completely destroyed from working with Jodi and others like her.
Right, thank you. That's very positive, Tara. Thank you. Jodi.
Yeah, I think definitely, obviously, what Tara said is, you know, we've learned more about different groups when you actually communicate, and thinking about what they would think or what they would do is very different, or what you've heard that they do is very different than interacting. And like Tara said, in this case, we've both so many similarities that it's been absolutely great. And we've been able to talk with different people that we might not have been able to talk with. I think also I've been able to educate, again, our institution, but other institutions as well. And it's very interesting how many things that we have in common. And we say all the time, you know, there might be 30 things that we need to do, and 10 of them they want to do, 10 of them we want to do, but 10 of them we want to do together. So let's concentrate on those 10 things, because it'll probably take us decades maybe to get through those 10 things. We don't have to worry about what we don't agree on. So moving forward, working together and working for the benefit of the animals is what we all really want. So yeah, I think sometimes you're scared to work with people, you don't understand them, but the best thing to do is jump in and also to be ready to listen. You know, it's the 2 ears, 1 mouth scenario. And I mean, I can probably talk the hind leg off a donkey, but it's very important to listen to other people. And I think that we do that all the time with each other and with other organizations with whom we work, because people want to be heard, and it's really important to hear them. And yeah, just doing that gives that respect. And we do that to each other. We've done that for each other since day one. And I think that's one of the reasons we've never had any problems. We've always listened to the other person as if we want to learn what they're saying, and not trying to wait till you get to tell them what you're thinking or how to do it or how they're wrong about things. And so it's been absolutely helpful. We learn so much from each other all the time.
Thank you both. It's really powerful. Okay, so let's go to some of the questions that are coming in. First of all, forgive me, I shall try and do my very best orator reading out voice. Question for Penny and Helen. How significant is the lack of understanding in sheep welfare on mud or lying times? Will it result in more wickedness to the problem, major delays to guidance? Oh, sorry, it's moving. Or is it something that can be addressed more simply?
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I guess we do know a lot more about dairy cattle than sheep or deer in terms of winter grazing. And New Zealand's animal welfare standards are underpinned by a scientific understanding, so that knowledge base is really important. So the Winter Grazing Action Group did go through a process of kind of doing a gap analysis of the literature and understanding where some key research is needed. At the moment, MPI are funding a little bit around lying times in sheep. So we've contracted ag research to deliver that, validating the use of data loggers and that kind of thing to actually try and gauge is lying as important to sheep as it is to cattle. So yeah, it is a challenge that I guess the sheep is seen as a flock level rather than an individual, and there is a bit of a data gap around sheep for some of these things. But our codes of welfare are underpinned by science, but also good practice and available technology. So those other kind of practical things are also important.
I agree with that. And I would add that if we start to think about assessing welfare using a 5 domains model, then we can add to that conversation and add to what we understand already. So for example, and also using a One Health lens as well. So if we're looking at leaving our soils exposed and the risk of runoff, soil structure being affected, although not as much with lighter animals, you know, there's a number of different things that we need to be considering here. And I would also say I don't think we should let perfection stand in the way of progress. You know, we know enough about a whole bunch of things, and we choose not to move because we don't have the perfect piece of science, and that's actually, I think that really hamstrings us. So I look forward to the research, but I don't think that should stop us from making decisions that move us in the right direction.
Thanks, Helen. So next one looks like it's probably best aimed at you as well. How do other countries solve the winter fodder problem?
I'm not an expert on what they're doing overseas. I think, you know, and I'm not sure that we necessarily want to look to that when we think about, I'm probably going to upset somebody. You know, one of the things that we trade off is our pastoral system.
you know, that's something that is lauded, and it's something that I believe we should hang on to. I mentioned energy scarcity. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but there's a big thing coming at us around how much energy we're going to have available to us over the next 2 to 3 decades. And any system that shifts off pasture into a more artificial environment requires more energy to run it, and that's going to get increasingly more expensive. So I think we should be focusing, rather than what's happening internationally and how they solve this, we should be looking to our own situation and thinking, how do we work inside the limits of Papa Tuanuku, which is going to improve animal welfare, it's going to improve human welfare, and make that the basis of our thinking and where we need to be for 2050.
Thank you, Helen. Tara, one for you. How can we make sure that things will go okay when thinking about trying to work with an activist organisation? And again, I probably shouldn't have aimed that at you. I should probably also ask Jodi to comment as well.
I think you want to go, or you want me to go?
You can go first.
Yeah, I think you don't know it's going to be okay. I think you just give it a go. I mean, don't, you know, work within your organization and make sure it's all right. But you always have to have a plan B. So if you are going to try and work with someone that you're not sure will respond kindly, then it is worth having a plan B, and do make sure that you should, you know, check with the people whose approval that you need. And you know, for me, that was just making sure with communications and legal that it was okay for me to take the reins on that. So you never do know it's going to be okay, but I always think it's worth a try. Look, if you're being kind and polite and respectful, I don't think it can hurt if somebody tells you where to go. Like, I was ready for Tara to tell me to, you know, F off, and then you know, put out something saying how rude and horrible the university was. You know, even though I really think she was going to do that, you have to be prepared for that. And yeah, but if you go in with a positive frame of mind and not attacking somebody, then you can only do what you can do.
Just before I come across to you, Tara, Jodi, I'd be interested to know, you sort of mentioned it, I'd be interested to know what the view of your legal department was and how they responded, because working in the university system myself, I can imagine that was a reasonably interesting conversation.
Wasn't at all. Wasn't at all. Our general counsel is all for openness. She's a lawyer, so it's like, yeah, the more open you can be, the better. She's like, yeah, go for it. So she's like, if something, basically it was like, look, if something happens and she says, I hate you, I'm going to write really horrible things about the university, you've made this worse for all of you, then we would have just turned around. And if somebody publishes something negative about you, you can either ignore it or you can write your own piece and say what you need to say. And that's, you know, that's what openness is. And if we would have wanted to say something, if they would have, you know, dragged our name through the mud, we would have just put out with comms and legal, you know, a statement or an article, and that just is what it is.
Thank you, Tara.
I would say, from the other side of the fence, I think what's really important is trust, number one, in terms of, like, the way Jodi went about it. It wasn't, it was very open, and she was very upfront about being upset about what we had put out, and it wasn't sort of sugar-coated. So it wasn't as though someone who we didn't know was coming in and trying to sort of manipulate the situation. It was more along the lines of, she was saying what she was upset about, and I was saying how we see it from a different lens. We're telling it from the story of the animal. She's representing the university. So it's a really hard one to sort of argue the finer details of the truth when we're both looking at it from a completely different lens. So it was, I would say that part was refreshing, was that I could tell Jodi was genuinely concerned, and the way she brought up the issue felt very genuine to me. But there have been some cases where, with other institutes in New Zealand, we don't have this sort of relationship with, and I would say in cases like that, it's because there is no trust. And what I mean by that is, in terms of believing what we would be told, it's really hard to listen to an opinion when you sort of feel like trying to pull the wool over your eyes as such. So it's yeah, I think one of the best things Jodi did was actually be very open and forthcoming with our differences, and we talk about our differences all the time, and I think that's what sort of creates that space to allow us to both, you know, remind one another of our sort of core values and, you know, where our position statements are, to keep those sort of free, open conversations going, because it's not like we're not talking to sort of sway one another and to be like, oh, I'm going to get Jodi over to the anti-vivisection side, and vice versa. It's more like we're learning from one another and seeing where there is space that we can collaborate on areas that we already do agree. So yeah, I think there just has to be a sense of being genuine and being willing to put in the effort to build that trust. Yeah.
You
Can I add something to that, John?
Oh,
Yeah, please do, Helen.
Tara actually has had a situation just recently where she went to connect with another anti-vivisection society, another organization that works in the space, and they did not hold the same values, and she did not have a good experience. Yeah. So it actually works that way too, where she was trying to ask somebody about things, and she.
Yeah, the collaborative approach is something that I think both sides need a bit of convincing on. Yeah, including the animal advocacy community, because not all charities run the same. And that was a case where, because Jodi and I went to a conference in Kentucky and spoke there recently, and the environment there is so different in terms of how animal rights activists are perceived. It's almost like animal rights activist equals terrorist over there, like the negative perception of what animal rights activists are like. And I call myself an animal rights activist, and I affiliate that with everything positive and peaceful. So it was a real sort of shock to hear about all of the awful situations that people there had been put in, and a lot of threats, and, you know, just different tactics than what NZAVS would ever use or promote or endorse. And so that was what Jodi just explained, was me trying to reach out to like a charity over there in the States to see if they would be open to being more vocal around the importance of being non-violent. And the response I got was not positive. But with that, it's the same sort of thing. Like, I'm going in there openly asking something. They didn't want a bar of it, and, you know, they could do what they want with that. But I went in there with a genuine, coming from a genuine place. So if they did go public with anything in a negative way, then I can stand up quite easily and say why we did what we did. So that's the other thing as well, is if you firmly believe in what you're doing and you have that solidly grounded, then there should be no issue in that concern, because you should be able to back yourself publicly anyway.
Thanks, Tara. Helen, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, it's a bit of a glib statement, but it's transparency builds trust, right? It's an oldie but a goodie, and the more transparent you can be and more people can understand certainly helps. It does come with some risk through the processes you were just speaking of, Tara. So on the task force, we also we had an activist, and again, it was one of those things where there was criticism about the fact that one of the people who had kind of led the activist side of that campaign was included in the task force. There's another old adage, which is keep your enemies close. But it wasn't actually about that. It was about, if we had those people sitting at the table, then it would be an education to understand about what the other side thought, which is just what you've described, Tara and Jodi. And actually, the interesting thing, I think, was fair to say, and Penny, you said around that table too, was to understand how much common ground there was with all the different parties, and that you know, it's that old thing where the biggest piece of the pie is actually the common ground, and then it's the little pieces, or the tiny slice, or the, you know, the icing that becomes the rub, the few details that cause all the distraction. But I think the other thing was, it was really beneficial for, and that was from both sides. So from I would say we had farm sector, we had animal advocates, and we had an environmental activist, and as well as some other scientists there. And no matter which side was speaking or whose values were being put on the table, there was generally speaking, a really high degree of agreement within the wider group around those values being important, and that they made sense to people. So for the environmental activists, it was the soil and the water, and and we're all like, well, of course that makes sense. We need, for the farmers, it was the animals and the environment and the people, and there was so much common ground. And I think that having those people all sitting around the table and being able to hear that and find that common ground built trust, but also meant that we were united as we published that report, going out, it's going to be challenging, there's going to be critique of it, but actually we've all sat around the table and understood how we got there, and that was really powerful.
Right, thank you. I'm going to, if you don't mind, there's a question in which sort of leads nicely on from the responses we've just had from the panel. For those who view your co-design collaborative approach as pandering to the other side, how do you address these concerns, and where does the balance lie? I don't know if anybody's ready. You can volunteer to take that first.
I've got about a very short statement about that, which is they need to do some co-design and figure out how that works if they haven't already. But it's always about compromise too, right? Like, that's the whole point about co-design, is that it has to be balanced on all of those, the various pieces that are put into the puzzle. And yep, pandering, if that's what you want to call it, I would call it compromise and finding a common ground.
We get this a little bit at NZAVS, I would say. We have a few, like, our charity's been around since 1978, and we've still got a lot of supporters from that time. And of course, we did used to run quite differently. The conferences that I talk at now, some of them NZAVS historically used to protest and organise protests at and disrupt. And now me stepping in, I come in and talk at these conferences. So it's a little bit, it's new, and it's a lot for people to wrap their heads around. And I think a lot of, like, everyone has their heart in the right place. They all love and care for animals, and they want to see an end to animal experimentation. It's just that their idea of taking action and making progress has looked like something else. It's looked like that sort of disruptive, loud, tactics that I mean, we still do the odd protest now, but everything has to have a purpose behind it, right? And if we can achieve things easier in another way, then of course we're going to do that, because we're here for animals and want to make the best impact for them. So to the people who sort of are a bit skeptical around it, I tend to say something along the lines of, we've tried other approaches for many, many years, and we've pretty much just been playing a tug of war. And sure, we've made some progress, but it's been baby steps forward compared to what we should have achieved. And in order for us to do our jobs properly, we need to be being as strategic as possible. So rather than pandering, I would say we're just being incredibly strategic, and we're not driven by anything other than making the world a better place for animals, people, and science. So we're not letting things like ego get in the way. And also, I say that the proof will sort of be in the pudding, because what I think Jodi and I have already been achieving together is helping convince people. But what we will continue to achieve, I think, will just continue to help convince skeptics that this is actually a really effective way of working. And yeah, that's why we did talk about the Striking at the Source campaign in our presentation, because that is something that has potential to have a lot of big impacts, and they will all be due to the collaborative approach. So I think it's acknowledging that, yeah, some people aren't ready for it, but also that we're going to prove them that this is the best way of going about it.
Great, thank you. Who hasn't responded? Penny or Jodi,
Yeah.
would you like to respond?
It's all right to tag on to that
Absolutely.
with a slightly cheesy quote, but it does bear true. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it does ring true. And also from a government perspective, we don't actually have a contact list of every farmer in New Zealand to try and get information out to them. So working with our sector bodies gives us another avenue of communication. They often have specialist sort of communication and extension development resources. So it gets you access to more resources and a better understanding of how to take a behaviour change approach, as opposed to sort of kind of sticking to your knitting, which for the government would be more around regulatory or standard based. So yeah, it does pull your resources.
Thanks, Penny.
Yeah, I don't pander. No, yeah, it's not really pandering. I think what we've done, I can only speak for us versus other people who might pander, but I think it's about listening and communicating effectively and compromising. It's not pandering. You don't get to have everything you want in this life, especially when you're working with a ton of different groups. And sometimes what you think is the right thing, when you start talking to other people in other groups, you realize, okay, there's more than one way to do that. Or, and if there's another way to do that, that might make everybody happy. And my way just makes me happy. If we're going to get to the same place, then let's be inclusive. So I think it's about communicating, working together, and compromising, not, but compromising in a good way to affect the change that you want to affect. So we don't pander to each other, and I tend not to pander in general. But yeah, again, I don't think that's it. I think it's more communicating effectively and compromising to get the goal, do what you want to do for the animals, I guess is what we're talking about here. So everything is for the animals eventually.
I'm not even sure compromising is the right word. Yeah, a lot of it is, I think Jodi and I both have learned a lot about one another's perspectives, and we know exactly where each other stand. So there's never a point in time where Jodi will think, does Tara want to end animal experimentation? Like, it's very, very clear throughout the whole time of where our sort of viewpoints are. And it is when you focus on those areas where there is over aligning goals, then I don't really think there's that compromising happening that much anyway, because these are areas where we already agree. So we're wanting to work on them.
Yeah, but sometimes it's the wording of things. If you put out it doesn't even feel like it's compromising, but say we write a media release or we write something and I don't like a sentence, and I might go, oh, what do you think about this? And then she's like, oh, can we do it like this? That's what I mean by compromising. It might be that I want to say that sentence one way. Tara would say it, if left to her own devices, another way. But when we work together and we go, yeah, we can both live with that wording. It's getting across the same thing that we both want to get across, but we've compromised on the words that are being used to do that.
Can I think I was struggling with that word too, Tara, because it does infer that you're giving away, your what your actual desires or goals are about where you're going, and it's not. That's not what it's about, right? But where my mind went as you were speaking, Jodi, is it's around actually this is about human behaviour change and taking little steps. And so you agree that actually this is the first step. So the compromise is we're not going to the end goal already. We're actually going to take a staged approach to continual progress. And so it's that compromise where our vision might look a little bit different to actually what's rolled out or what's spoken about potentially. But that also makes sure that we don't alienate people as we're making change, because big steps send us off down our rabbit holes, and then we're very difficult to extract from there.
So for me,
sorry, Jodi. If you don't mind, we are 2 minutes to go, and I would like to give you all 30 seconds summary opportunity. So whilst you're just thinking about what the final thing that you would leave, the session and what you'd like to communicate, what I've heard, actually, I think the three things I've heard most strongly are about shining a light on differences and acknowledging differences, identifying common ground, which I think has come through quite a lot, and then finally listening. I think it's been a really interesting and engaging discussion between the four of you, so thank you for that. And I guess I'll just go around the virtual room if there's any final comments you would like to make. Penny, I'm sorry, I'm going to come to you first, just simply because you were first up again, and it's easy. I have my list here of audience here. You are constantly
not compromising on it.
So I guess trying to keep to 30 seconds, it's about developing those trusted relationships. I've really enjoyed listening to Jodi and Tara's presentation. sort of going from a cold call to obviously knowing each other quite well, and developing that relationship, and yeah, kind of building on that. I think that was really cool. I'm not a scientist. I probably should have declared something at the start. I've just been in my role talking to people about animals for sort of 12 years now, so quite a long time. And I think the language and the framing is quite important when you're working collaboratively. So I probably wouldn't use the term wicked problem, Helen. I'd probably say complex or, you know, challenging. I think it's finding those words that get people on board, as you said, sort of small steps on a longer journey.
Thank you, Penny. Helen.
Yeah, common ground, the language we choose, noted Penny. And I also think there's a piece in here around, whilst we acknowledge that some of the things that we need to tackle in the next few decades are really difficult, that we shouldn't shy away from those conversations, because doing business by being reactive rather than collaborating, co-designing and being proactive and setting our own destiny, I think the latter is the way to do it, to get better outcomes and less stress along the way.
Thanks, Helen. Tara.
Takeaway message, I guess, would be that I'd really like to encourage as much openness as possible. I think that the more open people or institutes are with us, the more we learn and the better we can understand things. And when there are those areas of agreement, learning that is very much behind the scenes. And I think the public should know that too. I think that could change a lot of the culture around animal experimentation, and in particular, if people actually knew that a lot of the research community or scientific community involved would love to see an end to animal experimentation one day. I think, you know, it's one thing to be open behind closed doors, is what I'm trying to say, and that's amazing, and I love that. But I would love for some of the conversations I'm now getting to have to be able to be out in the world, in the big wide world, so that the public can actually see how much sort of progress is being made, particularly in mindsets.
Thank you, Tara. Jodi.
Yeah, I'll follow that up with that. Absolutely. We have to be open in our institutions, open with our internal community, our external community, for any research organizations, whether you do research or fund research. I headed this up, so I'm going to plug it, but the New Zealand Openness Agreement on Animal Research and Teaching, we were the first country outside of Europe to launch an openness agreement. So it's really, really important that we do that, again, for our communities and for the world and for the animals, most importantly. And so if you have an organization that either does research or funds research, by all means, please sign up to that openness agreement. And yeah, be open.
Thank you, Jodi. We are 2 minutes over, so unfortunately I must draw us to an end. On behalf of all the delegates, I'd like to thank you all for the time you've taken to both present and then answer questions. I was going to say this morning, because of course it's probably not somewhere in the world, whatever time it is, wherever you are as a delegate. And finally, I'd like to thank all four of you for your openness. So thank you very much indeed. That brings this session to an end. There will be a half-hour break and then we will continue. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, John. Ka kite.
Thank you.
Thank you.